For a photograph to occur, three things have to align. You have light, you have like a hole, and then you have something to receive the light on the other side. We could call that maybe a receiver. In the camera obscura, the building itself was the camera, and the wall behind the building was what we would call the receiver. And sometimes they could have a painter paint, that off of the wall and actually have a record of what was observed. But in our modern world today, we don't need that painter to come paint. All we need is a card, obviously. But the sensor in itself is the receiver. The sensor receives everything coming from that light, and the sensitivity of that sensor, how sensitive that sensor is to that light, is what we call the ISO. In today's video, we'll be digging deep into the ISO, talking about everything about it, how to use it, how to apply it in photography, whether you're using a camera or you're using an iPhone. My name is Ibukun. Let's dive right in. Alright guys, welcome back. Yeah, I like to make things very, very simple. I like to make things very easy, free-flowing, so that we can easily understand. Now, in ISO in itself is an acronym that stands for International Organization for Standardization. But really, what is ISO in photography without, leaving all the technicalities and just making it very, very easy? The ISO is the sensitivity of the sensor of that camera to light. So it's just think about it like if somebody pricks you with a needle, or maybe somebody even tries to poke you, with their hands. And some people might react differently to other people. If I poke you, you might not react. Some people might actually react and they'll say, oh yeah, that's quick reaction. But those two people have two different sensitivity levels, and that's why one is reacting more than the other. And it applies in the same way to the sensor. How sensitive is that sensor to light? And guess what? That is in your power as the photographer. You can decide how sensitive you want that sensor to become. It's straightforward, yeah? When you increase that sensitivity, guess what? Light comes into the camera and that picture becomes brighter in a sense. So the higher the ISO, the higher you increase the ISO, the more the camera can become sensitive to that light, so the brighter the picture in that sense. And as you bring that ISO down, it becomes darker. But why is it called ISO in the real sense? It's just a standard for the amount of change of light in that scenario. So if you move from ISO 100 to ISO 200, it's the same thing from ISO 200 to ISO 400. Another reason I think why this is also like that is if you think about a ruler, for example, you see a centimeter. If you have a centimeter on your ruler at home, or you take a ruler and check what a centimeter is. If you bring that ruler to me and we check, it's going to be the same centimeter on my own ruler. So there's a standard for what a centimeter is. No centimeter is longer than the other on different, I would say rulers. So on different cameras, regardless of the brand, the actual change of light from ISO 100 to ISO 200 is the same across the board. Photography is all about light, and the fundamentals of photography, which include the ISO, the aperture, and the shutter speed, which we'll be talking about, and some of the descriptions of those videos will be right there. The ISO in itself controls light as well as all the other elements do. But you see, the thing about the ISO is that it's basically just forcing the sensor to receive more light. So in a sense, the more you increase the ISO, as the picture gets brighter, you start to have something we call noise. And in that noise, it starts to get a lot more protruded, or I could say more obvious, the higher that ISO goes. So sometimes you have to be able to know how to balance one thing for the other. Noise is not necessarily a bad thing. Noise is just the behavior of what happens when you increase the ISO. I believe that with technology over time, as the future comes, give photography like another 40, 50, 60, 70 years. The topic of ISO and noise may not even be relatable terms anymore. I'm sure maybe cameras will be so good that they'll even be able to shoot in pitch black. If that's possible. But at some point it will get there. But for now, where we are right now is where you increase the ISO and the noise gets higher or more. so to speak. And it depends on the camera. Some cameras can handle noise better, some may not be able to handle it better. In a darker space, obviously, where somewhere is really dark, maybe in the evening or in a dark room, you want to increase that ISO, and as you're increasing it, you're beginning to see all the grains in the image and the noise. It gets a little bit frustrating for some people, but if you also like it, I mean, come on. Yeah, but some cameras actually handle it better than some other cameras, and that's why I say there will be cameras in the future that will even handle it even better. When you increase it, the noise becomes more. And when you reduce it, the noise becomes less. When you reduce the ISO to its lowest form, and there's enough lighting around, to get that picture to where you want it to be, you will have almost zero noise, which sometimes we consider as quality. So in making an image, like, there's so many ways we can actually apply, the ISO. I remember times when I used to cover concerts, a lot of concerts, and in those situations, it was literally open air sometimes, in the night, and then you have the lights on the stage and all of that. So a lot of things were dark most of the time, even though I used to add to my lights sometimes, like with like a flashlight or whatever, but I still had to increase the ISO, to kind of like get what I was looking for. And also the camera that I was using to, I would also manage and balance that with it, knowing the limits of the camera and knowing how much noise would be just, I wouldn't get almost any detail in the image anymore, so I also knew the limits of the camera. So there are times I had to increase the ISO. In the night, obviously, in low light situations, you want to increase the ISO and even support it by adding light if possible into some of those other situations. But we'll talk about lighting later on, But then with the ISO, once you know that once you increase it, it bumps up the picture gets brighter. And if you imagine you're shooting during the day, for example, you're out in the sun, obviously your ISO would not be that high, because once the ISO is high or too high, most likely the picture will be all white or something, When you bring it down, you would see that the image is getting a lot more darker, so you can actually make it or put it where you actually want it. As far as photography is concerned, there's nothing that is wrong, there's nothing that is right, there's only what you want to say. And the way you say it is where the technicality comes into play. Will that ISO maximize? Will that ISO like really help me achieve what I'm trying to achieve? So there's nothing like, oh, there's too much noise, or maybe there's too much noise sometimes, but it really depends on what you're trying to say and how you're able to manage it. What is the most important thing is that you understand how the tool works and you know how to apply it. So this basic, going back to the basics of it, the ISO is actually the sensitivity, how sensitive the sensor of the camera is to light. Alright guys, so let's quickly identify a couple of things about the ISO. We have, first of all, how it operates, and then we have how it behaves. Now, how it operates, we know that the higher the ISO, the brighter the picture gets, and as we lower that ISO, the picture gets darker. But in terms of its behavior, the higher the ISO goes, the more noise comes into the image, and as we bring that down, the noise reduces. So yes, we know that it gets brighter, we know that the ISO affects light, but at the same time, we know it affects noise in an image. So sometimes we have to learn how to balance those two things together in order to create a good image. So regardless of the camera you're using, whether it's a professional camera or an iPhone, you can actually practice these concepts. With the iPhone, there are a lot of apps out there you can download to help you use the camera manually, where you can change the ISO. And as you change it, you will notice how the picture gets either brighter or darker, and you will even notice the noise within the image as you change it. Even with the iPhone, it's even more evident because the camera on the iPhone is not necessarily as good as a professional camera, so it may not be able to handle noise better. So by the time you move the ISO up 1, 2, 3 stops, boom, it's already noisy. So you will notice this even better with your iPhone. So regardless of what you're using, get into these concepts and start to practice. So guys, in order to apply the ISO properly, you still need two other elements involved, which is the aperture and the shutter speed. If you remember the ideology I gave you guys in the beginning, that for a photograph to occur, you need lights, you need a hole, and you need a receiver. The size of that hole in itself is what we could refer to as the aperture. And the time it takes for that hole to open up to let light come in and close up is what we refer to as the shutter speed. In the next couple of videos, I'll be talking about and I'll be addressing these two other elements, and I'll also be addressing how to merge all the three together. And I'm talking about the ISO, the shutter speed, and the aperture to create what you're actually trying to do. Anyways, guys, let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you think. Did you learn anything today? Is there anything you think I left out, or is there anything you want me to talk about? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed anything in this video or you learned anything, yes, please like the video, turn on the post notification, and subscribe, because yes, it's one big family right here. So yeah, let's get it.